Hey, welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. We've been hearing testimony from Rachel Hendricks. Again, she is a surviving witness to this horrible shooting that took place back in 2015 in Florida, where James Colley is on trial right now for the murder of his wife, Amanda, and her best friend, Lindy Dobbins. Rachel was inside that home. You were hearing testimony of what actually happened inside the home. We cannot imagine that terror. I want to introduce right now my special guest, Saman Nasseri, a criminal defense attorney out in San Diego. Saman, how are you this afternoon, sir? Or morning for you, I should say.
Yeah, I'm doing great. How are you?
Absolutely. I'm wonderful. So we've been listening to this testimony, and I know you being a defense attorney, I don't know how you can build a defense when you have a surviving witness who described what happened inside that home, who saw the suspect, the defendant in this case, James Colley, going through that home, shooting people. How do you build a defense around that?
So from what I've gathered, they're trying to use the defense of involuntary intoxication, right? And that's a big expert defense. And that's going to be a hard defense for a jury to wrap their head around, because everyone's familiar with Ambien. Everyone's familiar with sleeping medications. But the problem is that Ambien and their parent companies have all come out in the past saying, we don't have these kinds of effects. It would cause you to do weird stuff, but go on rants or say stuff or kill people or be harming people. That's different. You might just, turn on your stove and go back to sleep. That's the issue here. But so it's a hard defense. It's a hard uphill battle. But at the same time, he's facing the death penalty. He's facing life in prison. It's one of those cases where you have to take it. You have to take it to trial because you don't have anything to lose at this point.
Yeah, I guess you have nothing to lose at this point. I want to read just a few bullet points about involuntary intoxications. It prevents the defendant from understanding what he or she is doing, causes the defendant to be unable to tell the difference between right and wrong, and it makes the defendant incapable of complying with the law. And there you see James Colley on your screen there, and it appears that this is his defense, that he was not aware of what he was doing. He was incapable of complying with the law. That is what his attorneys are saying, and that's for a jury to decide whether that is true. And we're going to switch gears here for just a second, have more of this James Colley trial, but first let's take a look at the top crime stories of the day here on the Law and Crime Network. Thank you for that, Anthony. Still with me, the criminal defense attorney out of San Diego, Saman Nasseri. Saman, we just heard this story about this DNA technology, which is pretty amazing. I mean, if you think back to DNA's first inception, when it started being used here in the United States, it definitely wasn't thought of that you could actually come up with a composite sketch. Look at that on your screen, a composite sketch, and you can see the image from 1976 and an age-enhanced image where two people were actually killed, two lovers that were out camping in Wisconsin. They were killed. And this technology that we have nowadays concerning DNA is just so amazing. I know there's so many criminals that are just shaking in their boots right now. And even myself thought about, man, have I done something like 30 years ago that I don't remember, that someone can come back and say, oh, yeah, it was Vincent that did this. What do you think about this new technology?
I think it's fantastic because not only is it going to help cold cases such as this one, hopefully get resolved, but it's also going to help exonerate a lot of people potentially who were wrongfully convicted on DNA evidence. I mean, if you even check with the California Innocence Project, the number of convictions they've even been able to overturn with the use of DNA technology over the past few years is incredible. So it's going to help a lot of people get out of prison. I mean, they're not going to get their lives back necessarily that they lost, but it is going to help the system be much more efficient and much more accurate.
Yeah, absolutely, and DNA definitely has exonerated a lot of people. There's one case I'm familiar with that I've worked with, I've talked to the family on. That was the Greg Taylor case. He was convicted in '93 of a murder in Raleigh, North Carolina, just to be found completely innocent in 2010, and DNA was part of the reason he was cleared. But from the other side of that aspect, you look at things like the Golden State Killer, and all of these other criminals that are now being caught years later because of DNA. And as a defense attorney, you're a defense attorney. Let's say you get a client that is 65, 70 years old, that is now being charged with murder. They linked his DNA to a crime scene from 40 years ago. What's your best defense around that?
I think it would be looking at the chain of custody of how the DNA even got in the first place. So, for example, the Golden State Killer, that was taken through one of those ancestry type kits or that, heritage type kits. And I would be arguing the accuracy and using expert testimony to argue the accuracy of that, of those results, those samples, to, narrow it down to one person who might be a relative of one person who gave their DNA to that kind of group. I would be arguing the accuracy of that technology. That would be my defense.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, most of this is still pretty new, right? It's just like back in the day when cell phone data was new into courtrooms. It was challenged. It still is to this day. But with these websites like Ancestry.com, 123andMe, or whatever it's called, it's still new. It's especially new in a courtroom. So to your point, yeah, there is argument there. But I think as a prosecutor, I'm still going to press because I think I can play on the emotions of the public with everything that DNA has done in the courtroom to say this is our guy. And I think a prosecutor, a good prosecutor, could actually sway the jury in that decision. We've been covering the James Colley murder trial in Florida all day. This is day 2 of the trial. They're on lunch right now. We're waiting for court to resume. We are going to take a quick break here on the Law and Crime Network. But when we return, we will have a very, very special guest. I assure you, you don't want to miss it. He will talk about this Ambien defense that James Colley is putting on. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. We were hearing testimony from David Kazi, a digital forensic investigator. He was talking about some voicemails left on that phone. Closely monitoring Florida. It looks like they are moving back into court. We have a live feed into the courtroom. They haven't started just yet, just getting back from their lunch break. Still with me is criminal defense attorney Saman Nasseri. Saman, I want to talk to you about these voicemails here because to me, it's setting the stage of a guy that was spiraling out of control. Please talk to me. Please talk to me. Please talk to me. This is the last time I'm calling you. Look, we've all been in bad relationships. I've been married twice, but I don't think I've ever acted like this, especially when you look at what happened after that. So as you're trying to build this defense, I think all the evidence is here that this guy was planning this, and it wasn't just some act of a last-minute thing because of Ambien. What say you?
I would say I don't think the voicemails, the name in the phone, any of that is really indicative of anything. Everyone has been in bad relationships. You see both sides.
You're a defense attorney.
Yeah, but I don't think the phone calls are indicative. Yes, he was spiraling out. Yes, he was upset. Yes, he was sad. Yes, he was angry. But to connect... Look, there's other evidence in the case that's bad, but to connect those voicemails, to connect the way that he was acting and how erratic and how angry and how upset and emotional he was over her, and connecting that to then him killing her. Most people don't break up with someone and then, plead for them back or plead for them to answer call and then go from 0 to 100 and then kill somebody. So it's really hard to connect that element with that was the premeditation for him going and murdering someone.
Well, I agree with your legal opinion for sure. I'm not an attorney. I'm just an ex-cop. But what I will say is, when you mentioned it's not indicative, yes, I agree. But I think it sets the tone. You look at, he left these voice messages. This is the last time I'm calling you. Then he goes to the house. He ransacks the house. Then he lies in wait for these individuals to get there. So, I don't know how these voice messages weighed on the jury and these text messages. I'm sure they're taking all of that into consideration when they decide the fate of James Colley. Again, he's on trial right now for the murder of his wife, Amanda, her friend, Lindy Dobbins. 2 people escaped that home, one being a boyfriend of Amanda, Lamar Dubberly, who we heard from earlier. Hopefully the court is resuming here shortly in the state of Florida. Again, we have a live feed into the courtroom. We will be watching it closely. James Colley, again, on trial for the murder of his wife. there in Florida, and a list of other charges, but I don't think those are really the ones he needs to worry about. This is a death penalty case in the state of Florida. Of course, the state will seek the death penalty. When we get back, hopefully we can get you back into that Florida courtroom. Stay tuned to the Law and Crime Network. The testimony from Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Bulick. He's the medical examiner that examined both bodies, Amanda Colley and Lindy Dobbins. Again, James Colley is on trial right now for the murder of his wife and her best friend. Still with me is criminal defense attorney Saman Nasseri. Saman, I just wanted to talk really quick. You heard the description that that medical examiner was giving about Amanda's body. She was clothed in a T-shirt. She had on yoga pants. So it tells me she was very relaxed, dressed for the day anyway. He mentioned the face and neck. Of course, we couldn't see those pictures for obvious reasons here on the Law and Crime Network. But do you think that will play as a defense attorney? You think looking at that body, we have about a minute here, do you think looking at that body will actually play into their overall decision in this case?
I think it just plays to the emotions of the jury. That's the reason to show the body. Everybody knows that it's a dead body. It's just a matter of showing the dead body, how it lies, how she was dressed. It's an emotional play to the jury. You know, remember, half of going to trial is putting on a show for the jury and what the jury is going to buy into. So it's one of those things that putting that on there, it's just going to show that maybe she wasn't expecting it, and it just plays in for what the prosecution is looking for.
Yep, it's definitely going to play into the emotions of the jury for sure. We're going to take a quick break here on the Law and Crime Network and get right back into the courtroom here in Florida in the James Colley death penalty case. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. We're still hearing testimony from Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Bulick. Saman, you're still with me, and I want to talk about these injuries because they're pretty gruesome, in my opinion. We heard that medical examiner just talk about the track of these bullets right to left, downwards. So that tells me a lot in this shooting. Mostly that Amanda was either on the ground or getting ready to go on the ground. She was maybe cowering down because we heard about a shot to the top of her head. One thing I want to point out, you're a defense attorney. One thing I want to point out as a juror, if I saw your client sitting there with his hands over his ears, and with his head down because he doesn't want to listen to what he did to his wife and her friend, I think my mind would already be made up. We heard about these wounds, and now he's sitting there like a coward with his hands over his ears. What say you?
I apologize. The trial is still playing in the background. You can hardly hear. But from what I gather, you're asking about his hands over his head, if I heard you correctly, right? If I was a juror, if I was a defense attorney, I'd be patting my client on the back saying, hey, stand up, stand up, make contact with the witness, maybe try to be taking some notes, but don't sit there with your head down, feet like that. It's a terrible posture. You want to portray to the jury that your client is paying attention to this case, that he's with this case, and that he's actively trying to fight this case.
Hey, Saman, let me cut you off right there. We have to toss to a quick break here in just a second, but I want our viewers to get that image in their head that James Colley was sitting in that courtroom with his hands over his ears because he doesn't want to hear what he did to his wife, Amanda. He shot her 9 times, according to this chief medical examiner. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. Still with me, criminal defense attorney Saman Nasseri in San Diego. And before the break, Saman, I tried to ask you a question. We had some technical difficulties. And what I was saying, as a juror, if I'm watching your client with his hands over his ears and his head down because he didn't want to hear what he did to his wife and her best friend, what would that do to a juror as far as what they decide in this case? Because if I was a juror and I saw that, and we can still see him on our screen with his hands covering his ears, not listening to this medical examiner, what does that do to a jury's mind?
So from a jury's perspective, they're looking at this and saying, okay, maybe he's feeling a little bit of remorse. He has his hands covering his ears. He doesn't want to hear how heinous it was. He doesn't want to remember how bad it was because one of his defenses is that he was out of his mind when it happened. But at the same time, as a defense attorney or as a juror, you don't want to look like you're defeated. I mean, he has his hands covering his head. He has his head down. He should be communicating with his attorney. He should be trying to take some notes. He should be paying attention to the case. This is his life on the line. So at the same time, he knows what he did. He knows what happened. And as a juror looking at this, it's just going to look like he just doesn't want to be part of it anymore. He's just detaching himself from the case.
Yeah, and listen, I don't like to bring emotion in a lot of things, but to me that looks like a man who is a coward, but he was really manly when he stood over his wife and shot her 9 times, even in the top of the head. Let's get back into the courtroom, hear more testimony from Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Bulick. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. You can still see live in the courtroom as James Colley holds his head down. It appeared for a second that he had actually started crying. We're still listening to testimony from Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Bulick, and still with me, Saman Nasseri, criminal defense attorney. Simone, I just got to ask you, we've been listening to these wounds. She was shot covering up a defensive wound, trying to protect her heart, shot through the breast, shot in the top of the head, shot 9 times total. We got witnesses to escape the house. They called 911. They said who did it. Why are we even going to trial on this? What is the purpose?
I mean, like I said from the beginning, it's a nothing to lose trial. They probably were not offering him any deals. There was no plea bargaining stage, I'm assuming. They probably tried to negotiate something the best that they could. And I guess they were just hoping to play to the emotions of the jury that, hey, look, yes, he killed her, but here's the reason why. And it wasn't premeditated, and it wasn't thought out, and it wasn't on purpose, for lack of better words, and hoping to play maybe to the sympathy of a judge when it comes down to the sentencing portion that, look, yes, this happened, but please take some sympathy here and keep the death penalty off the table because of the factors of this case. But the more you hear about the way the shooting took place, that's a very hard pill to swallow and a hard hurdle to get over.
Yeah, it's like swallowing a pill without water. But you mentioned deals. I mean, what kind of deal could you even possibly surmise in this whole thing? You know, if you're a defense and you're a prosecutor, oh, let's make a deal. What deal? He shot her 9 times. He stood over her. He shot her. He shot her in the top of the head. Lindy's teeth were shot out of her mouth from a gunshot wound to the head. What deal could you even come up with here?
It would just be a matter of trying to take the death penalty off the table. It would be most likely a life sentence, 25 to life sentence, consecutive sentences. So there would be really very close to zero chance of him ever getting out. And it would just, that would be the deal from my perspective, based on what I know about the case and what we've seen. That would be the deal that probably should be presented on the table for the defense attorneys, but I doubt the prosecution took that.
Yeah, and I think that image of James Colley right now in that courtroom, again, with his hands over his ears, with his eyes closed, you can see it there on your screen. It tells me he really does not want to hear what he did to his wife. Doesn't necessarily mean he has remorse, but he doesn't want to hear what he did. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back here on the Law and Crime Network and right back into the courtroom, James Colley murder trial in Florida. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. Before we get back to court, I want to thank Saman Nasseri for joining us today, criminal defense attorney in San Diego. We appreciate your perspective here on the Law and Crime Network and hope to have you back soon. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me. Have a good day.
Likewise. And now let's get back into the Florida courtroom. James Colley is on trial right now for murder. Let's go.